What up, everybody? This is Esoteric Eddie. Namaste. Welcome to episode 2 of Esoteric Spotlight, where I briefly review interesting people, places, or events. Again, this is a laid back show, mostly audio. So, whatever it is you're doing or wherever you are, kick back, relax, and enjoy the information. All right, so today's episode is on elongated skulls, more specifically, the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru. So apparently, there have been some elongated skulls that have been found there, and of course, the guy who made it famous was or is Brian Forrester, and he is famous for being on the Ancient Alien TV show. And surprise, I'm actually going to be releasing an interview that I did with him next week after this video drops. So make sure you keep a third eye out for that, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and also follow me on Instagram at Esoteric Eddie. All right, enough of that. So let's just get into it. So, an elongated skull is a human skull, of course, that is long or big or alien looking, right? I'm sure some of you have seen the photos or videos. If you haven't, just go do a quick Google search and come back to this video or whatever you got to do. But Brian Forrester has been researching these skulls for about 14 years, and what he found was fascinating. So mainstream academia is not going to, or at least it's not ready to admit that there are genuine elongated skulls. As of right now, they're just writing it off as what is known as ACD, artificial cranial deformated skulls, basically stating that these native peoples did this to themselves, did this to their babies, manipulating the skull to form in that way. However, by the works of Brian Forrester and the local scientists, archaeologists, and also international scientists that he has worked with, we've been able to uncover that these skulls, at least a majority of them, were not artificially created. I'll get more into the science, but before I do, I just want to go through some basic points about Peru and the general history of that area. All right, so in 900 BC, we saw the rise of the Chavin people. And in 300 BC is when the Paracas people emerge on the coast of Peru, on the west coast, that is. And Paracas is where these elongated skulls are being found. So the Paracas people were some of the earliest of the Peruvian. In 200 BC, the Mochica of North Peru emerged. In 500 AD, the city of Tiwanaku developed south of Lake Titicaca. 1000 AD, Incan groups emerged into the valley of Cusco. And in the 1430s, the Incan prince defeated the neighboring cities and tribes, starting the Incan Empire, and Cusco became its capital. And of course, in the 1500s, Amerigo Vespucci traveled to the Americas, and in the 1530s, Francisco Pizarro captured the last Incan king, Atahualpa. So as you can see, Peruvian history goes far, far back, and the Incan Empire is just a small section of that, and really the most relevant or recent section. So here's some more general history. The Chimu preceded the Inca. They were exquisite goldsmithers. Both were preceded by the Mochica, who were also goldsmithers. And over 30 pyramid structures have been found in the Mochica area that were excavated in the 1930s. But all of these were preceded by the Chavin people. Chavin ruins were discovered and examined by Julio C. Tello, who placed them about 1500 BC. And the Chavin, just like the Olmec of Mexico, suddenly appeared with unique art styles, unique building styles, and set the foundation for the rest of the civilization and people that would come after them. And strangely enough, there are some artistic connections from the Chavin and the Mesopotamian. Explorer H. Ubelode Doring, in his On the Royal Highway of the Incas, was surprised to find sculptures of people with seemingly Semitic features. One in particular he dubbed the King of Assyria. Alright, so those are just some basic and interesting facts about Peru. And as we can see, it's got an ancient and mysterious history that isn't quite fully understood. Alright, so these Paracas skulls, these alien looking elongated skulls, are the largest elongated skulls, and they are found specifically in Paracas, Peru. And of course, there are some among them that were artificially created. And what I mean by that is that the people who the skulls belong to when they were alive, they artificially pressed their heads, with certain apparatuses to get it to form in that shape. And these skulls are known as the ACDs, the skulls with artificial cranial deformation. However, there are some of the skulls that are real, and what makes them real is that these skulls have a pushed back foramen magnum. And what the foramen magnum is the hole from which your spine enters your skull. And the foramen magnum in these elongated skulls are pushed further back, meaning that their necks were probably longer and their heads kind of tilted outward a bit. And that is significant because although you can squish your head with rudimentary apparatuses to get it into an elongated shape over time, it is impossible to push back your foramen magnum. If you were to try this, you would instantly die. The foramen magnum cannot be manipulated to be pushed back. That is strictly a genetic feature. And another thing about the real elongated skulls is that they have different suture lines on the skull. And a suture line is like the stitching from where the different parts of the skull come together. And the suture lines on the elongated skulls are all the same, and they are different than a natural human skull, which again means that this is a form of evolution. These skulls formed this way through evolution for who knows how long. And another thing about the skulls is that they are overall greater in volume, because the ones that were artificially created, they just have big foreheads or a more elongated tip or something, but everything else is still kind of small and a bit deformed because of the artificial cranial deformation. But these elongated skulls that are genuine have an overall consistency in the volume of every part of the skull. For example, all the genuine skulls have 50% larger eye sockets than the normal human skull or the artificially created elongated skulls. In the early Spanish colonization era, there were a lot of local legends of ancient giant red-haired deities or peoples, and even some of the Incan royalty were of lighter complexion with red hair. And red hair occurs naturally on approximately 1 to 2% of the human population. It occurs more frequently, 2 to 6%, in people of Northern or Western Europe ancestry, and less frequently in other populations. Red hair appears in people with 2 copies of a recessive gene on chromosome 16, which causes a mutation in the MC1R protein. Alright, so I just brought up that science with the red hair and the weird local legends of red-haired giants or royals in Inca, because interestingly enough, a lot of these skulls, these elongated skulls in Paracas, Peru, are reported to have red hair. Which is weird because the people of Inca, the indigenous people, have stark black hair, which is usually straight, whereas these red-haired elongated skulls seem to have like wavy hair, which kind of gives us a clue as to who they really were. Okay, so Brian Forrester, again, the guy who's been researching these skulls on the ground for about 14 years, provided some genetic testing on 18 of these skulls, and this process took him about 3 to 7 years of battling with the local archaeologists to get permission, and then having all of this tested and of course written down and figured out. So those 18 skulls seemingly are from about 2 to 3,000 years ago. And out of the 18, 12 of them were returned because some of them had DNA that was badly damaged. And two of the research facilities that he utilized for this genetic testing was the Canadian Lakehead University and UCLA over in California. The mainstream scientists were expecting that the genes would show that these people belong to the genetic haplogroups of A, B, and C. A haplogroup is basically a genetic category based on geographical location. So the scientists were expecting these elongated skulls to belong to the haplogroups of the Native American category. And the mainstream scientists were also assuming that the blood type of these elongated skulls would be blood type O, meaning that they would be 100% Native American. Out of the 12 that were returned, 4 of those were haplogroup B, meaning that they were indigenous. And out of the rest, there were U2E, H1A, and H2. And these stem from the Caucasus Mountains near the Black Sea. And the blood type was 28.5% A, 7.1% B, and 21.4% AB, which is the rarest on Earth, and 43% O. So less than 0.5% of the blood type that was sampled was indigenous to the area. Alright, so a couple things to keep in mind. These skulls are an anomaly that are genuine, and they seem to have red wavy hair, and they have genes going back to the Caucasus Mountains near the Black Sea. Now what's interesting is that the second largest elongated skulls found in the world are found in Crimea, which is north of the Black Sea. Recently, the skeletons of 5 people with elongated skulls have been dug up in the Russian annexed region of Crimea. The remains date from slightly less than 2,000 years ago and are believed to be from the ancient Sarmatian culture. This time period is similar to the age of the Peru skulls. The Sarmatians considered such artificial reshaping of the skull as beautiful, but also essential for warriors, including women. In the late 2nd or early 3rd century AD, the Greek physician Galen declared that the Sarmatians, Scythians, and other northern peoples had reddish hair. They are said to owe their name, Sarmatai, to that characteristic. The Sarmatians were a large Iranian confederation that existed in classical antiquity, flourishing from about the 5th century BC to 4th century AD. Alright, so we got this strange anomaly of the world's largest elongated skulls being found in Paracas, Peru, that have genes going back to the Black Sea area and also have red wavy hair. And incidentally, we have the second largest elongated skulls found in Crimea, north of the Black Sea, and these skulls were said to have belonged to the red-haired Sarmatians, who were ancestors of the Iranian people. Alright, so what makes this all very interesting is that it all kind of relates to the Indo-European migration theory and the Aryan invasion theory. The Indo-European migration theory basically states that there used to be a hub of tribal people which resided in Central Eurasia, which then spread out to all the different areas of Eurasia, formulating the old world languages and civilizations such as Sanskrit, which would later give birth to all the modern European languages and cultures. And in the 1800s, mainstream academians realized that Sanskrit was and is the oldest living language born out of the Indo-European era. And it was apparent then that Sanskrit was the mother tongue of the Latin, Germanic, Russian, and English languages. And some scholars did not like that, so they came up with what is known as the Aryan invasion theory. And these scholars basically stated that there's no way that Sanskrit and the Sanskrit speaking people were the originators of the Indo-European cultures, that there must have been some missing link before them that was akin to the Germanic or Russian people. And they came up with this utilizing the Vedas, which are the sacred text of the Hindu people, kind of manipulating them against the people. There are tales in the Vedas about these people known as the Aryans or the Arya, who in early times subjugated the humble agricultural people. It can be assumed within the Vedas that these Arya or Aryans were a warlike people who were seeking out to build an empire, and some have interpreted that these Arya or Aryans within the Vedas were of lighter skin complexion and were subjugating some of the darker skinned agricultural tribes. But the thing is that the Aryans or Arya don't refer to an ethnic group of people within the Vedas. The term is a title, a social identifier, and Arya simply means the noble. And this whole Aryan complex has also been used within India's history to justify the caste system. So the European academics manipulated this interpretation and created the Aryan invasion theory to justify the concept of an older race preceding the Sanskrit-speaking people who were of lighter complexion, who might have been the actual ancestors of the European people. All right, so that's somewhat irrelevant to this episode, but I just think that it's fascinating that there's all this mystery surrounding Eurasia. We have this Indo-European migration theory, and we do have all the languages there that do have similarities that point to a mother tongue, which as of right now is Sanskrit, and we have all these legends of the gods, of course, and what makes it all weird is that we have these elongated skulls in Crimea, which is almost at the center of where the Indo-European migration occurred from, and you also have the Peru skulls, which are genetically related to those skulls, which could be said to be of Indo-European ancestry. All right, so it gets weirder. In 1000 BC, these Indo-Europeans left the Caucasus Mountains towards West China in the Xinjiang area. Swedish archaeologists in 1934 and later Xinjiang archaeologists in 2000 found some of the oldest preserved mummies in the Tarim Basin area of China. And these mummies have red hair. They are also known as the Tokharians, given to their language and text in the early 20th century by scholars who identified them with a people known in ancient Greek as the Tokharoi and Tokhari in Latin, who inhabited Bactria from the 2nd century BC. Tokharian is an extinct branch of the Indo-European language family, which includes English, Latin, Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit. Tokharian was discovered in manuscripts from the Tarim Basin in northwest China, which date from 500 to 100 CE. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that they first moved east to southern Siberia in the 3rd millennium BCE, then south to the Tarim Basin, where they may have arrived as early as the 2nd millennium BCE. The arrival of the Tokharians in the Tarim Basin is possibly linked to ancient corpses found there, the so-called Tarim mummies. The name Tokharian, German Tokharisch, was proposed first by F.W.K. Müller in 1907, and a year later by the renowned pair of Tokharianists Sieg and Siegling. Its use came about because of the translation of a sacred book, the Tokshri, that was used as an intermediary language. Sieg and Siegling assumed that this intermediary language was identical to the Greek Tokharoi and Sanskrit Tukhara, denoting the inhabitants of Bactria, where the Tokharians were thought to have originated. Alright, so you have these mummies found in the Tarim Basin of China, which is northwest, near where the Indo-European migration took place, that have red hair. that were seemingly going back to these legendary Tokharian people who resided in Bactria, which was near the Black Sea area, well, southeast of it at least, but near the central hub of the Indo-European migration. And then you have again these elongated skulls and these red-haired elongated skulls in Peru, which really have no business being there. Chun-Jiang Li, an ancient DNA specialist at Jilin University, ran studies on 20 of these Tarim Basin mummies, and he found that the dominant haplogroup was haplogroup C, which is East Eurasia, likely in South Siberia. Also, H and K, West Eurasia, primarily Western Europe. Also, he found rare and non-existent DNA. The red hair genes of the Paracas skulls do not match with European Neanderthal genes. Quoting from Brian Forrester's work, he says, "It cannot be ruled out that one particular subspecies of Neanderthal passed on the MC1R mutation to Homo sapiens. It is, however, unlikely that this happened in Europe because red hair is conspicuously absent from or very low in parts of Europe with the highest percentages of haplogroup I and R1A, the only two lineage associated with Mesolithic and Paleolithic Europeans. We must therefore look for the source of red hair elsewhere. Unsurprisingly, the answer lies with the R1B people, thought to have recolonized Central and Western Europe during the Bronze Age. The origins of haplogroup R1B are complex and shrouded in controversy to this day. The author favors the theory of a Middle Eastern origin, followed by a migration to the North Caucasus and Pontic Steppe, serving as a starting point for a Bronze Age invasion of the Balkans, then Central and Western Europe. This theory also happens to be the only one that explains the presence of the red-haired mummies in the Tarim area of China. Alright, so you got Brian Forrester, the guy who's been researching these skulls on the ground in person with laboratory scientists for 14 years, saying that these Paracas skulls have red hair and genes and blood types going to the Caucasus Mountains, where we also find elongated skulls, red-haired mummies in China, and the strange theories of the Indo-European migration, and that the red hair of the Paracas skulls do not match up with European Neanderthal red hair genes, but most likely with a later Middle Eastern red hair gene. Alright, so what's going on here? What do I think is happening? Well, here's some more interesting pieces of information that I think add to all of this. Geologists of Columbia University, Dr. William B. F. Ryan and Dr. Walter C. Pittman wrote in a book known as Noah's Flood that around 5600 BC, the Mediterranean Sea rose due to glaciers melting, and for 2 years, a total of about 20 times the Niagara Falls fell into the Black Sea. And right around the same time that they were doing their research, explorer Robert Ballard, the famed discoverer of the Titanic, reported evidence of a submerged shoreline several miles from the current edge of the Black Sea and hundreds of feet below the surface. And he also found a 7,500-year-old building that was found 300 feet below the Black Sea during this research, which concluded that there was a civilization that existed there. And all of this research also concluded that right around 2300 BC, the flooding subsided. Alright, so this is huge. So the Black Sea, right around 5600 BC or so, started flooding. And that was in the center of the Indo-European, hub before the migration took place. So if the Black Sea was flooding, this could have been one of the reasons the original Indo-European people set out to migrate. And this flood could coincide with the biblical flood. And as we recall, the biblical flood was initiated by God not just to teach mankind a lesson, but more specifically to kill off the offspring of the sons of God and mankind, which created the abominable Nephilim. And of course, these Nephilim were also known as being giants in certain interpretations. And what's interesting in the Apocrypha, right, the books that were taken out of the Bible, such as the Book of Enoch, some of the Nephilim are described as having lighter skin. So could this Black Sea flooding be connected to the biblical flood? And could these lighter skinned, elongated skull Indo-Europeans who were warlike and migrating around the world be related to the Nephilim or the fallen angels? Interestingly enough, Brian Forrester mentions that in Paracas, Peru, there are date palms that you won't find anywhere else in Peru. And of course, date palms are natural in the Middle East. Brian Forrester speculated that these original elongated skulled Paracas people sailed from the Persian Gulf down to Peru. And so maybe all of this is going on because of this Black Sea flood, or because the ancient gods were hunting these elongated skulled Nephilim who were trying to escape their sentencing. It's interesting that there are also tales in Northern America of red-haired giants. It seems as if the history of the Nephilim, or these elongated skulled people, is being held kept a secret simply because in ancient times they were wiped out and exterminated, and the victors don't want them to be remembered because they were their enemies. So what better defeat than to completely erase your entire family's history? So I'm not saying these Nephilim or these elongated skulled people were good or evil, but there's a lot of strange connections here with the red hair, with the genes going back to the Black Sea area, the Black Sea flood, the biblical stories, the stories and mythologies all around the world, and the fact that mainstream academia does not want to face the truth of these elongated skulled people. All right, so that's my take on the subject. This has been the Esoteric Spotlight on the elongated skull mystery. I got an interview coming out with Brian Forrester next week, so keep your third eye out for that. And again, thank you and namaste.